even those people that predicted baseball wouldn't happen. We were going to say it wasn't going to work. There's no way they can make it work. They can't do it, but they are doing it. Craig Muter is with the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. He's on the line right now. Craig, good morning.
Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Doing well, and so is baseball. We're getting through this, it seems.
It seems like we are. I was just saying that to somebody the other day. It seems like now we've established the pattern, which is there's an outbreak here, and they deal with it, and they reschedule some doubleheaders and get through it. And they seem to be able to have handled this, which is great news, because I think we're 3 weeks away from the end of the season. Believe it or not, the season ends on September 27th. So we're less than 3 weeks away from the end of it. I think we're going to make it.
It does seem that. Where it will get tricky is what do we do if there's an outbreak during the playoffs?
Well, they haven't announced this yet. There's been rumors that they're going to do a bubble setup, that they're going to do like 3 different bubbles with the postseason teams to prevent this from happening, because you make a really good point. If you have an outbreak in the postseason, you can't just reschedule doubleheaders. It doesn't work that way. So I would think in the next, few days, we're going to get that announcement. They're going to say, okay, this is how we're going to do this.
It is also interesting how baseball has had to manage Yankees struggling with after getting off to such a great start, struggling with you get a few injuries, there's no break anymore. It's basically you're playing almost every single day. It's putting a big load of pressure, I think, on pitching staffs out there.
It's a really good point. The starting pitching staffs are the ones that really take the heat in doubleheaders. Yeah. And if you don't have some depth and you don't have some guys you can call up and count on, it can snowball on you in a hurry.
Yeah. All right. I wanted to bring up, just have you chat a little bit about, if you could, a little bit about Tom Seaver. It's funny, I was watching the Mets game yesterday, and Swan, a pitcher that pitched with the Mets during the late 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, was talking about his experience with Tom Seaver. It seems like everybody that knew Tom Seaver really, really loved Tom Seaver.
There was, and Bill, because you grew up in the same era that I did in the 70s. There was something about him, and he was bigger than the game. We all felt it. We all knew it, and it was his approach. He was so methodical and disciplined about how he was going to approach the game. And this is before video. This is before analytics. None of that stuff existed. Tom did it all in his head. Yeah. And that's how he approached the game, and was so – yes, he had the tools. The guy had a 95-mile-an-hour fastball and could put it on the black whenever he wanted to. But it was more than that. It was his mental discipline to the game. And that made him just bigger than the game, and we all remember that. I remember him being on ABC and ABC Sports all the time. And in fact, if you listen to Game 6 of the '77 World Series, when Reggie Jackson hits the 3 home runs in Game 6, Seaver is on that call in the booth with ABC, but of course Howard Cosell overrides him on the 3rd home run, especially. But that's how big he was. During the game, during his career, he's in the booth calling games. That says it all. Part of it was he was just an articulate, thoughtful man, but the other part was his status as, this is a baseball icon. You knew it when it was happening. Yeah.
So Craig Swan was speaking yesterday about how he's a former Mets pitcher that was very close to Tom Seaver and was up and coming, and Tom Seaver would help out the younger pitchers. And the question was asked, how did he help you? And he said, well, listen, I could never pitch as hard as Seaver could pitch, but what he did is he taught me how to read the batters. And that is, when you talk about the analytics of today's game, Tom Seaver seemed to do it all in his head.
He did. He spent time. I read a quote from him one time that said, every morning I get up and read the box scores from the previous day's game and see, who we're playing, and see who got 2 hits last night, so I know how to pitch them. And he said, I might want to read the theater reviews, but I don't. I read the box scores because this is what I need to do, to continue my job and to do what I need to do. Yeah. And that's what he was. He was just a very disciplined, very focused person. And it's funny you bring up Craig Swan. Swan. Craig Swan. I don't. How many people remember that Craig Swan led the NL in ERA in 1978 with 2.43 or 2.43 ERA? And the reason I remember Craig Swan is because, on those Topps cards, or baseball cards you get when you're a kid, they came out, the 1979 card has Craig Swan as the ERA leader at 2.43, and that was like the first year I followed baseball. I just assumed that Craig Swan was the best pitcher in baseball and would be so for the rest of, eternity. So that's how baseball cards can fool you, right? But
wow.
Just the impact Seaver had on so many guys, not just with the Mets, with the Reds, and then with the White Sox and Red Sox, truly incredible.
I guess I'll just say this as a complaint. First of all, not this part being a complaint. It's amazing that you just pulled up that story on an obscure reference like Craig Swan.
Right.
But let me ask you this on Seaver. It's just one of those things, again, with the Mets where you scratch your head. We traded him away once. We got him back and let him go again, right, because he wasn't protected. And then he ended up throwing his 500th. He got his 500th win with the White Sox. And then to make matters worse, he was a longtime broadcaster with the Mets. But before we ever took him, we let the Yankees throw him in the booth.
Yeah.
So in '83 when he came back to the Mets for one season in '83, he pitches pretty well, and he's like 38 years old. At that time, the way the free agent compensation went in baseball was if you lost a free agent, you could pick from a pool of guys who teams put in a pool as compensation, and so I think it was teams could protect like 20 guys out of the 25-man roster, something like that, and Frank Cashin didn't put Seaver on the list because he thought that Seaver was making $1 million or so back then, which was a fair amount of money, and he thought there's no way someone's going to take a 38-year-old pitcher and pay him $1 million at this point in his career. But Seaver was so exceptional, he goes to the White Sox and he's just as effective at 39 and 40, winning 15, 16 games a year for the White Sox. This was a guy who his mechanics were so good too, Jeff. That's another thing about him is drop and drive it, and people use that term very loosely. It's like, off the cuff. But that's exactly what he did, and that's why he pitched so well for so long, because he was so perfect with throwing the ball, relying on his legs, that he could pitch, deep into his 30s.
Well, interestingly, and even as the Mets were bad, he still was winning 14, 15, 16 games a year.
And really, that was a offensively challenged Mets team. I mean, Seaver probably could have had, realistically, 20 to 30 more wins at his peak because the Mets weren't scoring.
Right.
And basically, he had to, he was either going to shut people out or it was going to be a close game. And he knew that. And he said, hey, look, I realized if I gave up one run, then my job was not to give up two. And if I gave up two, my job was not to give up three, because he knew that, especially in that era, too. It wasn't just the Mets. It was, run scoring was down in that era. He had to be as good as possible every time out, and he was.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, you're looking at a DeGrom who had an amazing outing over the weekend. But, he gets to the 6th, 7th inning, and you're feeling uneasy with the best pitcher in baseball right now. How did these guys do it? How did Tom Seaver do it? And he was able to do it into the 80s. It's just crazy.
I think part of it, and you have to tip your cap to the guys of this generation. Part of it is these guys now are not throwing 95 like Seaver. They're throwing 98 on the black, and that's just it's almost impossible for the human arm to do that. And some guys will say, well, if they just build up their strength, they could pitch more innings. I'm not sure I buy that. To an extent, there's probably some truth in that, but I think these guys are throwing so hard now, and back in the 70s, your shortstop is 5'11" and 170. He's not going to hit the ball out, so okay, I can leave the ball with a plate. I don't have to put everything on it. And if he hits it, the best it's going to be is a double to the gap. He's not going to hit it out. Now, 1 through 9, everybody's hitting the ball out. So you've got to be very, very good. Every pitch perfect. And I think that's what the difference is. That's why guys aren't throwing 300 innings anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really quite crazy. I want to ask you from a Hall of Fame standpoint. Does this season, what kind of asterisks does this season get? Have you guys had any discussion about that?
history is going to judge it. It's going to be interesting to see whether. And I was thinking of comparison, like 1981 when the strike happened and they played about 100 games. How's that looked at? Well, the bottom line is the L.A. Dodgers won the World Series that year, and nobody goes back and says, "Hey, it was an asterisk year; it doesn't count." No, it all counts. It all's on their record. They have all their rings. So I think in the end, the champion's going to be the champion.
Yep.
Now, if somebody hits 400, I think there's going to be an asterisk by that.
There should
but
be.
It's interestingly enough that doesn't seem to be happening. Baseball, there's something magic about baseball where it kind of always evens itself out. It's this great leveler, the sport. And I think you're going to end up seeing that, with the averages.
Well, if I could just say, I think there isn't somebody close to hitting 400 at the moment, and there isn't because of the type of the style of play today is what I wanted to say. I hate to say this, but it's become more and more, in my opinion, a boring game. It's home run or strikeout. Edwin Diaz, we criticized him for his inability to seal games, to close out games for the Mets. They read a stat yesterday. In 17 innings of work, he's got almost 40 strikeouts. Per 9 innings, it's more than 20 strikeouts a game he's getting.
It's just he's giving up the big ball.
But he gives up every fourth batter. It's like a home run, and he blows the game. So I don't know.
Otherwise,
that's certainly part of it. Guys are swinging for the fences all the time. They're hitting into the shift, even though the shift is being, you're putting 5 infielders on 5 guys on one side of the bag, second base bag, and you're still hitting into the shift. But I do think that over time, this is going to even itself out, and people are going to say, "Hey, wait a minute, what am I doing? Let's start hitting the other way." I think people this will correct itself over time. What I would love to see, what I really want to see, is Greg Maddux 2.0. Some guy who comes out and says, "Look, I don't have to throw 98, and I don't have to have the slider that hits the dirt all the time. What I've got to do is I've got to be very fine. I've got to hit the corners all the time. And if I do that, I can win 17 games. I can pitch 250 innings, and not have to throw crazily fast." It can happen. Greg Maddux did it. Now, I'm not saying that, Greg Maddux is once in a lifetime, but it can happen again.
Yep.
And that's what I want to see. And that will kind of take care of the long ball swingers, because they'll have to start hitting the ball the other way.
Craig Muter, Baseball Hall of Fame. We love talking to you, talking baseball, and what a year. We appreciate your time.
It's always a pleasure, guys. Take care.
Thanks so much.